Hello, this is part 2 of the lecture, The Psychology of Giving Bible Studies, from the Saved in a Living Room Bible Worker Training Seminar. I'd like to review our main thoughts from the previous lecture. Remember, there are 3 great questions of life on the mind of anyone searching for truth. That is, who is God? What has He done for me? And what does He want me to do for Him in return? Again, with witnessing, and especially in Bible study situations, sharing messages of truth, you have to answer these questions in order. We'll go over a number of questions as well that we mentioned last time to keep in mind from any particular individual study session. And those questions are, what is the main point of the lesson? Can you think of any real-world example from your own life that illustrates this point? How does it relate to the first coming of Jesus? The second coming of Jesus, Ian's own need of Jesus, and to reiterate, Ian is an acronym, stands for Interested and in Need. That's anyone that you're studying the Bible with. And how does the Bible study you're giving relate to the great controversy theme being played out in every generation in world history? And as well, how does it relate to the previous studies that you've given? How can you use this particular study to plant seeds for studies to come? Are there any sins to avoid? And as well, what counterfeits exist in the world that you can briefly, and I say again briefly, mention? And when the study transitions into the differences in Christian faith that exist, you have to also discuss, in a brief way, what counterfeits there are in other churches. What small decision can Ian make now that will be a step toward your goal for him or her of making that great decision for taking a stand for Jesus and the truth? Because you see, each study has to end with a mini decision to accept what has been presented, and that will lead to the great decision. And finally, what should you say in your closing prayer? Now today we're going to go over some practical tips on the do's and don'ts of Bible study giving. But first I wanted to address a question that may exist in some people's minds from something that was said in the last lecture. That on how the system that we have at present for sharing the Advent message has a niche that needs to be filled. This quote is from the book Amazing Journey, Amazing Grace, the incredible story of how God led 2 Pentecostal pastors into the Seventh-day Adventist Church. This is by Ken and Nancy Eyrick, and on page 169, Ken says, Nancy and I had all too often witnessed people in the church simply parroting the teachings of pastors or televangelists, what they heard from others or read in a book, without fully understanding the doctrine or the teaching themselves. We also knew that the vast majority of Christians did not know how to explain what they believed to someone else, and even fewer knew how to use the Bible to support their beliefs. Now that was in their days as Pentecostal pastors, but as well, does it not also apply to the way things are in the Seventh-day Adventist Church? Again, if you would like to go and purchase a set of videos or a set of pamphlets and go out and share them with friends, you are doing a wonderful thing to advance the cause of Christ, even if you don't fully understand what's being said on those videos or pamphlets. But how much better could it be if you knew the truth well enough to be able to give chain reference Bible studies, to take into account the different questions that will come up, side issues that will come up, doubts that will be mentioned, arguments against that have become very popular, and to be able to take all those things into account, including those questions that we discussed here, and be able to tailor-make each Bible study for each individual person that you're sharing with. And that's what this is about. It's not to put anybody else down. It is to help us all be the best that we can be. So with that, let's go with some practical tips, again, on things to do in a Bible study situation. Though you do want to plant seeds for future studies in your discussion, you want to make sure not to emphasize too much of that you end up getting sidetracked. You have to pick one topic at a time and stick to it. If you are looking everywhere you can to find people to study the Bible with, and someone does say yes after you've asked that person, don't wait to check your schedule. Just make the appointment right then and there and get that first Bible study going within a week as soon as you possibly can. And do everything you can to establish a regular habit of Bible studies from that point on, especially for the first 6 weeks. Don't cancel or change any appointments. After that, yes, life may get in the way, a doctor's appointment or something like that, so you have to phone them up. Let's move it to Wednesday this week instead of our normal Friday appointment. But you've got to let Ian know that this is important. It's important to you, it's important to him, and that you are important to him. Don't use college-level big words to describe anything. As Ian's knowledge and interest is very much lower at first, you have to adapt the study to fit him, and that's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do is keep the time element under control. About 45 minutes and a dozen texts is a good goal to have for your first round of Bible studies. If he asks questions, give short answers, give Bible answers as much as you can. And if you decide to give any follow-up literature, follow this rule. In general, with witnessing and Bible study giving, the further away the person is from the truth, the smaller the pamphlet you should give, and the shorter the answer to their question should be. One of the most important things is to remember socializing has to keep only at the start of the Bible study. You want to leave with the person having the last thought about the Bible study, especially the main point of the Bible study. And as the pastor who brought me to Christ, Richard Warman, said, when studying with someone, always leave that person wanting a little bit more. Bible study and the giving of one's heart also is a very intensely personal experience. I received training from Pastor Louis Torres at Mission College of Evangelism, and what he said to me in class was, don't talk about joining the church in front of the interest's friends. You'll only embarrass him. Ian has to be allowed to control his own witnessing. After the training I received from the Torres family, I was allowed by the Lord's grace to participate, along with my wife and a local pastor, in a project to plant a new church, about an hour and a half drive from where I live, in the town of Canmore, Alberta. Mountain Sanctuary, Seventh-day Adventist Company is there. And we spoke at 2 crusades over a course of about a year and a half. We also did a number of door-to-door outreach work. And I remember at one point we had a situation where a woman had come to church on a regular basis with us and was also going to church on Sunday with another organization at the same time. She'd heard everything in the Advent message and was still considering it, hadn't made her final decision. So what Pastor Kelly Schultz said to me was, whoever offends her first will lose her. If someone over there says, what are you keeping that old Sabbath for? We'll have her. Just keep showing her Christian love. And at the time he said that was when she was still considering the Advent message. Finally, when she did take a stand for the Lord, she told us that what won her over was our sincerity. You see, there are some people who, when they come, they are searching, and they are asking the question in their hearts, what is the truth? But some people, again, maybe not as experienced in spiritual things, but they come saying, does this work for you? Because they're not 100% sure of what truth is. But if they can see an example of the power of the truth working in someone, then they'll be prone to believe it. They'll be open to it. And that is an equally valid proof as well. Jesus had mentioned that also. As soon as you have any indication from your friend during your study time that the interest level in this person is growing, get Ian to help you with the praying. You always want to pray an opening prayer and a closing prayer. And so you can vary that each week. He'll say the opening prayer one week and the closing prayer the next week, etc. Also, your format for sharing Bible studies has to be this way as well. You start with the opening text, you read it, you make some comments and elaborate on it, all the while keeping those questions in the back of your mind, and then also looking for feedback from Ian as to how the message of what you have given to him sinks into his heart and mind. And then it's the time for the second text, and so you get him to read the second text, make some more comments, have some more conversation back and forth, and this is how you go, text by text, back and forth. Again, also, when you see the interest, opening prayer and closing prayer varying, he has to share in the Bible study as much as possible. As we mentioned last time, The process of conversion is simply one where Ian is broken before God, who makes him anew when he is willing to stand for all that he has learned. It will happen at different times and in different ways for each Ian you meet. So to help him along, one of the best things you can do is to share your own testimony. Tell of how the Lord has worked to save you. Don't glorify your sins with a detailed account. He's got to be able to see an example of the truth working in you. You don't want to pretend you're perfect, no, but you don't want to have any glaringly obvious feature that stands in the way. You don't want to make the central focus of what you're talking to him about how bad you were. You want to make it how clean Christ made you afterward. This idea of not drawing attention to yourself in a negative way also applies to how you dress, to how you act in a Bible study. You have to have proper personal habits, be clean, shall we say, and a fairly reasonable degree of dress. Doesn't have to be a formal suit, but definitely nothing in the way of ratty clothing. As well, do not ever flirt. Billy Graham has a policy of never being alone with a woman who's not his wife. And in fact, if you are in a situation, say you're a man giving a Bible study to a woman who is a mother of small children, bringing along the third person can be a big help, because the devil will use those children to get to the mother. So, the third person can help keep the children occupied while the study happens. I have a quote for you from Evangelism, page 647. We must, in our work, not only strike the iron when it is hot, but make the iron hot by striking. You want to go as fast as your friend is willing to follow. And as his interest level grows, you'll see an increasing openness to all spiritual things. So you have to look for opportunities to make the call. And if you're not seeing any opportunities, try to find them. Try to make a call and see if it will create the interest. One of the best things you can do, if there's been no interest by the time you get to a study on baptism, make that your first chance to make a call for decision. Ask the person, would you like to get baptized? I have a verse for you from Acts chapter 8, verses 35 to 37. Then Philip opened his mouth and began at the same scripture, and preached unto him Jesus. And as they went on their way, they came unto a certain water. And the eunuch said, See, here is water. What doth hinder me to be baptized? And Philip said, If thou believest with all thine heart, thou mayest. And he answered and said, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. So Philip preached to him, and he wanted to get baptized, even though he preached Christ to him. So he must have, at some point in his discussion, covered the doctrine of baptism. That the eunuch wanted to be baptized supported this. And again, he was able to say, there's nothing standing in my way. A lot of us don't see that. We need to be asked. You need to show him there's nothing standing in the way. And if he brings up any objections, you need to look for Bible answers to remove those objections. When you see any evidence of conviction manifesting itself, don't forget to pour on the prayer. You've got to pray for Ian. You've got to also pray for yourself, that you'll have the tact, the wisdom, and not only that, the courage and the strength to make that call. It's one of the hardest things people can do. It's one of the hardest times when you finally realize that you have no power to reach someone, is when you actually ask them, would you like to take a stand for what you've been shown? And you know it's totally up to the Holy Spirit when the person does say yes. But it's also one of the best ways to encourage your own faith, is to see that success. Now, let's say the person says no. Maybe what the person really means is not yet. Remember the great vision Daniel was given in chapter 8. But how does chapter 8 end? In verse 27 it says, And I, Daniel, fainted. In other words, he couldn't handle it, and was sick certain days. Afterward I rose up and did the king's business. And I was astonished at the vision, but none understood it. The events of chapter 9 don't happen for years to come. Come on, kitty. Come here. It's okay, Oreo. Come on. You may have met Oreo in the Bible study video, How to Study the Bible. Come on, buddy. Okay. Come on. Come on. Come on. Come on. Come on. Come here.
Somebody needs a dino with you.
Here's my kitty friend Oreo. Now another important thing, under the Lord's guidance, you are controlling the Bible study. You are in essence controlling your friend in that Bible study. Don't let that control go beyond the Bible study. For instance, don't try to sway Ian to your point of view on political issues. Speak softly, calmly, and lovingly, and phrase all comments in a way that's positive as much as you can. The way Pastor Torres said, it was never get angry, because then that which is holy will have been brought down to a common level. So that's a very important thing to keep in your mind. Don't belittle the study time with jokes or humorous anecdotes. And as well, don't sensationalize it with conspiracy stories. No matter how you feel about whether the events of 9/11 were a conspiracy or not, don't inject any of those things, or the Jesuits or any of those things, into a Bible study. You won't win a friend, you'll win a fanatic, and he won't do the church any good. Now there's a time to point out error and sin, both in the church and in the world, as we mentioned in our questions that we covered. But don't forget, the main point of every single Bible study has got to be what's right with the truth, not what's wrong with everything else. If you're spending the whole study refuting something, then that person will have doubt planted in their mind, because you'll be saying, in essence, that you really believe what the doubt is, and you're trying so hard to refute it, scrambling so much. That's not what you want. If you're in a Bible study situation with someone who is an evangelical Christian already, they have likely gone through the process to some degree. They've learned who is God. They have learned what has He done for me. They don't agree fully with us on some of the answers to the question of what does He want me to do for Him in return. And that's the point at which you're at. So essentially, the issues of present truth, like the Sabbath and the truth about death, you have to present them in a way that they are a continuation of that same experience of being broken and made anew. The way you can understand it is by reading Romans chapter 7, verse 9. It says, I was alive without the law once, but when the commandment came, sin revived, and I died. Now I'll rephrase it. That's how it goes for someone who's in the world and learns the answer to all three questions. But for someone who's in the church already, just needs a little more help with that last question. Thanks, Oreo. The process is like this. We'll just add a little bit of modification to Romans 7, verse 9. I was alive in my born-again faith without the law once, before being brought into contact with this new truth. But when the fourth commandment came, sin revived, and I, in other words, all that I thought I knew of what being born again really meant, died. And that's the way it is for evangelical Christians when they come in contact with the Advent message. Don't forget, if you're in this situation, you have to give respect that whatever situation the person's in, that the Lord has led them that far. And the Lord is simply using you to help them grow a little bit more. Value the experience they've already been given. Honor and validate any spiritual experience they share with you that's obviously the leading of the Lord. If you have that sort of attitude in your mind as you're presenting with people, you'll have a lot less arguments. You'll hopefully win a lot more souls than you will arguments over doctrine. Don't forget to claim those Bible promises for the Lord's help. Isaiah 55:11, we talked about it last time. So shall my word be that goeth forth out of my mouth. It shall not return unto me void, but it shall accomplish that which I please, and it shall prosper in the thing thereto that I sent it. If you see no tears of joy at being forgiven, or if you don't see any anger, remember all the lists of conviction that we went through last time. Positive and negative signs of conviction to watch for. If you see absolutely none of that, there's one more very important sign of conviction to look for. Your friend Ian, interested and in need, really believes what you've shared with him when he shares it with someone else. As soon as you see that, make the call for decision. Rearrange your program to start the fast track to baptism, because the person's ready, whether he or she realizes it or not. Most likely after this decision is made and Ian comes to know the Lord, he will make some sort of great confession to you. Keep that in confidence for life. Pray with him, pray for him, but assure him of victory in the cross and that through Jesus he can beat whatever problem it is that he's just shared with you. Very important though, never ever check up on his progress. That will only serve to remind him of sins that have been buried in the bottom of the sea. Ian may also give you a gift from his heart. It's a gift to God. Accept it as that. And when the baptism happens, when Ian is ready to join the church, mark the occasion with a gift to Ian, appropriate to the amount of time and effort you put into reaching this person. Now when Ian is newly converted, when he's on fire for the Lord, his family and friends have a new person to deal with. They'll either accept him or reject him based on the message that he's sharing with them. If they are still willing to associate with him, no matter how much animosity they may have to all that he's learned and all that he's sharing, there's still hope for them. But if they cut him off right away, no matter who they are, how close they are to him, they're cutting him off because they're letting him go, because they're rejecting the message itself. So he has to be advised, no matter how painful it is, give him as much comfort as you can, but he has to be advised to let them go. Also, if you read John 21 verse 3, you'll see a simple statement from Peter. This is when they're in Galilee by the lake, days, weeks after the events of the cross and the resurrection weekend. He said, I go a-fishing. This was essentially a once more for old time's sake sort of scenario. Just before Ian gets baptized, he may come to you and say that he's done something or that he wants to do something from his old life, some of his old ways. It may seem questionable, you don't really want to support it, but don't be too worried about it either. What he's really doing is testing the waters. Does his old way cause pain to his new heart? That's the question he has on his mind, and he's doing a little experiment. And he will find out that yes, it does, and likely he will never do it again, whatever it is. Basically, he needs to say goodbye to his old life on his own terms. Some final thoughts to wrap up here. Giving Bible studies does have its fair share of heartaches, inconveniences to your schedule, time commitments, a lot of prayer, maybe sleepless nights. But those joys far outweigh them. James 5:20, let him know that he which converteth the sinner from the error of his way shall save a soul from death and shall hide a multitude of sins. The history of the world is changed for good just a little bit more in just one little way because one person took a stand for Christ. Now there's all kinds of things that could have happened, bad things that could have happened if that person had stayed on the path of sin, that never will, because now that person is on the path of righteousness. And as Jesus promised to the woman at the well about how the water that we drink becomes a well spring flowing out into everlasting life, it's natural when you've truly found God that you want to share with others. So the influence that this person will have in the world and the other people that he or she will reach will be far-ranging, including immediately the family and friends. Hundreds of people that maybe never had heard of the Advent message who will now have their chance because one person has been saved. Our final quote will be from Testimonies, Volume 9, page 135. The truth is soon to triumph gloriously, and all who now choose to be laborers together with God will triumph with it. And the next Saved in a Living Room lecture will be Mentoring New Converts.